Karen from the HOA showed up at my cabin with a smug smile and a clipboard, threatening to evict me for unauthorized occupancy. What she didn't know was that I didn't just own the cabin, I owned the lake, the land under it, and the only parking lot their entire community relied on. Asterisk, I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, soaking in the quiet ripples of the lake when trouble arrived. The sun had just started to warm the morning air, casting golden light across the water. Birds chirped from the pine trees that framed the cabin, and the whole scene felt like something out of a postcard, peaceful, simple, and mine. That lake, those trees, even the old wood of the cabin beneath MIT all belonged to me, inherited from my grandfather, who had bought up this entire stretch of land decades ago, back when no one saw any value in a lake tucked far from the main roads. Then came the sharp knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and folks who know me know better than to visit without calling first. I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and opened the door. That's when I saw her, Karen. I didn't know her name yet, but she had the look. Sunglasses too big for her face, a clipboard held like it was a badge, and that unmistakable mixture of fake politeness and deep-rooted entitlement. Two other people stood behind her, both older, both clearly there just to nod along with whatever nonsense she was about to throw at me. "Good morning," she said, but there wasn't anything good in her tone. "We're here from the Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association. Are you the resident here?" I looked her up and down before answering. "Yeah, I live here. What's this about?" She didn't miss a beat. "We've received several complaints from members of our community about this structure. It does not conform to our neighborhood standards and was never approved by the HOA board. You're in violation of Section 12. Article 4 unapproved residential modifications, and Article 9 non-compliant construction. We're issuing you a formal notice. You have 10 days to vacate and bring this property into compliance." She pulled a paper from her clipboard and handed it to me like she was delivering a court order. I looked at the paper, then looked back at her, still holding my coffee. I didn't even read it at first. I was too caught off guard by the stupidity of what I'd just heard. "Vacate?" I asked slowly. "Yes," she said, already turning like she had other cabins to threaten. "We'll give you time to collect your things, but this structure will need to be either removed or renovated to meet HOA codes." I leaned against the doorframe and finally chuckled. "Lady, you have no clue who you're talking to." She paused and turned back, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me," I said, "you don't know who you're talking to. This cabin is on my land. The lake you see behind me, mine. The road you drove in on, also mine, and that parking lot your residents use to get to the lake, that's leased from me." She looked stunned for half a second, but quickly tried to cover it with attitude. "That's impossible. This is Lakeview Heights jurisdiction. You're clearly within our area." "Nope," I said, finally sipping my coffee again. "You bought land that touches mine, that's all. The HOA boundary ends at that big oak tree near the split in the trail. My grandfather made sure of that when he sold off a small corner of the land to the developers back in the 90s. And before you say anything else, you might want to go check your records." She opened her mouth like she had a comeback ready, but nothing came out. One of the men behind her looked nervous now, and the other was pretending to study a squirrel. Karen didn't say another word. She just huffed and walked back to her golf cart, the two silent lackeys shuffling behind her. I watched them drive off, shaking my head. The audacity of these people. I thought that would be the end of it, some overly ambitious HOA officer barking up the wrong tree, realizing her mistake, and backing off. I was wrong. 2 days later, I noticed small laminated signs nailed to trees near the entrance of my driveway. "Private property, no trespassing, HOA enforcement zone." I tore them down immediately and threw them in the fire pit. I was furious. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. They were now trying to stake claim to land that didn't belong to them. Then came the drone. I was out back working on the canoe when I heard the buzz. Looked up and saw the little thing floating just above my dock, slowly rotating like it was recording every inch of my property. I grabbed my phone, snapped a picture of it, then pulled out my shotgun and fired a warning blast into the air. The drone zipped off in a panic, vanishing into the tree line, like a scared bird. I never intended to hit at time, not reckless, but I wasn't about to be spied on in my own home that night. I pulled out the deed land maps and a few letters from the original developer, the guy who bought part of my grandfather's property for the subdivision. Everything was crystal clear. The HOA owned nothing beyond their gated community. The lake, never theirs. The dock, built by my dad and grandfather. The gravel road and the parking lot by the lake entrance. On land they leased for $1 a year under a now expiring agreement. In fact, the only reason they had lake access at all was because my grandfather wanted to be neighborly. Clearly that spirit had not survived. I took all those documents and drove straight to my lawyer the next morning. He was a quiet, sharp guy who had dealt with plenty of HOA nonsense before. When I told him what was happening, he actually laughed. "This is classic Karen behavior," he said, flipping through the papers. "You're fine, but let's make sure they know that. We'll send them a formal cease and desist letter. Include a copy of your land deed, boundary survey, and a friendly reminder that they have no legal standing to threaten you with anything. And the drone? I asked. He smirked. That's an invasion of privacy. We'll include that too. We sent the letter that day by certified mail, with a copy emailed directly to the HOA board. I figured that would be the end of it. Surely no one would be dumb enough to keep pushing after seeing how badly out of bounds they were. But I underestimated just how deep the arrogance ran in that little community. The next morning I caught one of the HOA board members, an old man, with sunburned skin and the nose of someone who'd spent too many years yelling at kids walking around near my dock with a camera in hand. He didn't even flinch when I called out to him, "Hey, what are you doing on my land?" "Routine inspection," he called back, as if that explained anything. "There's nothing routine about trespassing," I snapped. "You've got 30 seconds to leave or I'm calling the sheriff." He didn't argue, just turned around and walked back toward his golf cart, muttering something about community safety. That was the moment I knew I had to go further. A legal warning wasn't going to stop them. They had tasted power for too long and didn't like being told no, so I decided to remind them just how much power they didn't have. I started planning. I gathered every legal document, every recorded message, every photo. I printed out the map of the HOA boundaries, highlighting how far away my cabin sat. Then I circled the parking lot, big, bold, and unmistakably mine. And then I marked the expiration date on the lease. 6 months from now, they would be completely at my mercy. And I was just getting started. The air felt different after I sent that cease and desist letter. At first, days passed without any drones buzzing overhead, no strange men walking near my dock, and no ridiculous signs nailed to my trees. It was quiet again, almost too quiet I didn't trust it. People like Karen don't walk away, they regroup. And regroup she did. I first noticed something was up when my mailman, Larry, handed me a thick envelope one afternoon. He looked a little confused. "Hey man, this one looks fancy. Some kind of notice from the HOA. Thought you didn't even belong to one." "I don't," I said, taking the envelope. The front was printed with that phony official HOA seal. They liked to stamp on everything, probably to make themselves feel like they were some sort of government agency. I opened it right there on the porch, and sure enough, it was more nonsense. This time, it was labeled a final enforcement action. Inside were photos, poorly lit shots of my dock, my canoe, even my porch furniture. All of it labeled as unauthorized structures. They were doubling down. Worse, they included a schedule for mandatory inspections and said failure to comply could result in legal recourse. I laughed out loud. "Legal recourse," I muttered, shaking my head. They really don't learn, but it wasn't just letters now. That same week I noticed the HOA had posted signs at the lake entrance near the community parking lot. Big banners with bold letters, "Private use only, Lakeview Heights residents, trespassers will be prosecuted." That was rich, considering they didn't own the lake or the lot. I walked down there the next morning, took pictures of the signs, and called my lawyer again. His voice was flat when I told him. "They're pushing their luck now," he said. "Good news is, every time they do something like this, they strengthen your case. We'll send another formal response, but I think it's time you went public with this." "Public?" I asked. "Absolutely. People need to know who actually owns what. They're claiming authority they don't have and making threats in writing. That's not just foolish, it's potentially illegal." "Want me to reach out to the local paper?" "No," I said. "I've got a better idea. If they wanted to play games in public, I'd beat them at it." See, Lakeview Heights had a Facebook group, open to local residents. They used it to post about lost dogs, bake sales, and their precious HOA announcements. I had never posted in it before, but I still had access. My email was listed under the lease for the parking lot, and the admin never thought to remove me. That night I sat down, uploaded every document I had, land deeds, aerial maps, lease agreements, and wrote a long, polite post. It started simple. "Hello Lakeview Heights residents. You may have seen signs around the lake or received HOA notices about my cabin. I'd like to clarify a few things." Then I laid it all out. The history of the land, how my grandfather had owned the property since 1983, how he had sold a portion of it to the original developers, but retained the lake, cabin land, road, and parking lot. I attached a lease showing their parking area was rented for $1 a year, set to expire soon. I even attached screenshots of the drone footage they'd taken and a copy of the threatening letter I'd just received. And then I ended it with this: "I have no intention of causing trouble, but I will not be bullied off my own land. If any of you are concerned about the HOA's behavior, I encourage you to ask them why they're spending your money on legal threats that have no legal standing." The post exploded. Within 2 hours, it had over 100 comments. Some people were shocked. They had no idea they didn't actually own the lake access. Others were furious. "I thought the HOA owned that whole area," one woman wrote. "Why are they harassing someone who's lived here longer than any of us?" Someone else chimed in, "I can't believe our fees are going to this crap. This guy owns the land, he has every right to be there." By morning, the post had been shared over 30 times, and the HOA board had shut off comments on the group. Classic move when you're losing a fight. That afternoon, I got another visit, but this time, not from Karen. A man named Joel showed up in a modest pickup truck. He introduced himself as a homeowner in Lakeview Heights and asked if we could talk. I invited him to sit on the porch. He didn't seem hostile, just tired. "Listen," he said, "I've been here for 7 years. I had no idea this cabin wasn't part of the HOA. None of us did. We were told we had access to the lake, and that the HOA managed it. They lied," I said plainly. He nodded. "Yeah, it looks that way now. People are pissed, man, not just about the signs, but about the lease. We didn't know the parking lot was rented. If that gets shut down, they'd have to walk half a mile through brush to get to the lake." I finished for him. He scratched his head. "Karen's always been aggressive, but this is another level. Some of us on the board, well, not me personally, but some of them, they really believed they could push you off your land. They thought you'd back down. They were wrong," I said. He let out a long sigh. "Look, I'm not here to pick a fight. I think what they're doing is wrong. A few of us are trying to call an emergency board meeting. Karen's lost the room. If enough homeowners show up, we can vote to suspend her authority." I raised an eyebrow. "You can do that?" "Yeah," he said, "but we'll need proof. I know you posted everything online, but can you bring the physical docs, the deed, lease, map stuff they can't deny?" "I'll be there," I said without hesitation. 3 days later, I stood in the Lakeview Heights Community Center in front of a packed room of angry homeowners. Karen was sitting at the table up front, flanked by the same 2 goons from before, now looking very uncomfortable. I walked to the front, nodded to Joel, and handed out printed copies of every document I had. The room was dead silent as I explained how my grandfather had owned this land long before Lakeview Heights ever existed, how the cabin was on private property outside HOA jurisdiction, and how they'd been leasing the parking lot for practically nothing. Then I pointed to Karen. "This woman has not only overstepped her legal authority, but she's also put your entire community at risk by provoking a landowner you depend on for lake access. She sent threatening letters, flew drones over my home, and tried to intimidate me into leaving, all without any legal grounds." A man stood up in the back. "So if that lease ends and you lock the gates, we can't get to the lake anymore, correct?" I said. "Unless you want to walk through swamp and poison ivy." The room erupted. People were shouting, now not at me, but at the board. "How could you let this happen? We pay hundreds a month for access and it's not even ours." "Karen, did you know about this?" Karen stood up, red in the face, waving her hands like she was calming a school classroom. "Everyone, please, we were acting in the best interest of the community. We had every reason to believe this structure was illegal." "You had no reason," I interrupted. "You just assumed you were in charge, but you're not." By the end of the meeting, a motion had been made, a vote was cast, and Karen, for the first time in years, was removed from the board. She didn't take it well. She stormed out of the room in a cloud of perfume and rage, muttering something about lawyers and not over yet. But no one followed her, not even her 2 lackeys. As I walked out of the building, Joel caught up with me. "That went better than I expected," he said, smiling. "She'll be back," I replied. "People like her always are, but next time, they'll think twice." Karen may have lost her seat on the HOA board, but that didn't mean the war was over. I knew better than to think people like her gave up after one public embarrassment. If anything, it just made them meaner. She went quiet, sure, but that silence had a tension to it like the air before a thunderstorm. I could feel something building, and I was right. The first sign came when a crew of landscapers showed up at the lake parking lot one morning. I watched from my cabin porch as a couple of trucks pulled in, one carrying gravel, another towing a small bulldozer. I didn't recognize the company name on the side. They started unloading tools like they owned the place. I walked down, hands in my pockets, staying calm. "Hey there," I said, approaching the man in charge. "What's all this?" He turned, gave me a polite nod, then said, "We're here for a resurfacing job. Got an order from Lakeview Heights HOA to clean up and regrade this lot. Gonna add new gravel and edging." I held up a hand. "This lot is on private land. It belongs to me. Who gave you permission to do any work here?" He blinked. "The HOA. They sent a deposit and paperwork. Said this was all approved." "It's not," I said flatly. "They don't own this land. I leased this lot to them. That lease doesn't include construction rights or modification without permission." The guy looked uncomfortable now. "Listen, man, I'm just doing my job. You got some paperwork or something?" I pulled out my phone, opened the digital copy of the lease agreement, and showed it to him. "Right here. Clause 9. Lessee shall not alter the surface structure or vegetation of leased property without express written consent of the lessor." That's me, and I didn't give it. He scratched the back of his neck. "Well, I guess we gotta pack up." Then they left without a fight, but I wasn't foolish enough to think that was the end of it. Someone, most likely Karen, was testing the boundaries, seeing if she could quietly make changes without alerting me. If I hadn't seen those trucks that morning, they'd have finished the job and pretended it had always been theirs. But now she had a bigger problem. That little stunt gave me legal ammunition. I met with my lawyer that week and told him what happened. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. "She's trying to build a paper trail," he said. Make it look like the HOA has been improving and maintaining the lot, hoping someday they can argue it's community property through adverse possession or something equally stupid. Can they even do that? Not legally, he said. But she's banking on confusion. If you don't react, if you let them leave improvements for years, a court could one day consider her argument. But now that you've documented it and told them to stop, that's your line in the sand. That same day, he drafted a formal cease and desist letter specifically regarding any construction or landscaping activities on the parking lot. We delivered it to the current board and requested that any future use or alteration be pre-approved in writing. I also posted a copy of the lease agreement on the community bulletin board right next to their HOA meeting announcements. By that weekend, things had gotten awkward. Residents who had been friendly before started giving me strange looks when I walked the lake trail. A few people who used to wave didn't even make eye contact anymore. One woman with 2 little dogs pulled them aside when she saw me coming, as if I were radioactive. Joel stopped by again a few days later. He looked concerned. Karen's stirring people up, he said. She's going door to door now, telling folks you're trying to shut down their access. Says you're planning to cancel the lease and build a fence. I laughed. A fence? Why would I fence off a parking lot? She says you want to turn it into a private marina, he said. Says you're trying to sell lakefront memberships for thousands of dollars. People are panicking. That's a lie, I said. I have no interest in a marina. I just want them to leave me alone. Yeah, well, he sighed. You're up against fear now. Karen knows how to twist a story. She's making herself the victim, like she's defending the community from some greedy outsider. I'm not an outsider, I snapped. My family's had this land for 40 years. I'm the one who let them lease that parking lot for $1. Joel raised his hands. I get it. I believe you. But not everyone else does. Karen's holding backyard meetings, stirring up resentment, saying you're threatening their access, and raising fees. She wants her seat back. I sat down on the porch bench and rubbed my temples. I had no interest in local drama, but it seemed like I was now the center of it. That's when I made a decision. I had kept quiet long enough, hoping facts would speak for themselves. But it was clear now that people didn't want facts. They wanted reassurance. They wanted to hear from me, not just read my documents. So I decided to host my own meeting. I printed flyers and pinned them all around the neighborhood trails, mailboxes, and the community board. The flyer read, Community Lake Meeting Saturday at 10 a.m. where, Lake Parking Lot topic, the truth about property, access, and the future of Lakeview Heights. All residents welcome. Bring questions, I'll bring answers. Hosted by the landowner. Me, I figured maybe 10 people would show up. Over 40 did. Chairs were brought out from trunks. Some people sat on logs. Families showed up with kids. Joel stood by me to help answer questions, but I did most of the talking. I started by thanking everyone for coming, then pulled out a large printed map of the area. I showed them the property lines, the official survey, and pointed out where the HOA's land stopped and where mine began. Everything from this trail, I said, drawing a line with my finger, to the shoreline, including this parking lot, is mine. The HOA does not own it. They lease it, always have. Someone in the back raised a hand. So why the threats? Why now? Because someone, I said carefully, not naming Karen directly, tried to evict me from my cabin. Claimed I didn't belong here, sent me letters, flew drones over my house, called inspectors. And when I didn't leave, they tried to pave the parking lot without permission. Gasps spread through the crowd. I continued, let me be clear, I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I don't want to build a fence. I'm not building a marina. I just want my peace. I want my home left alone, and I want the HOA to stop acting like they own what they don't. An older man stood up. You have the lease, right? For the lot. I do, I said. Right here. I held up a laminated copy. Then what happens when it ends? I paused. That depends. If the HOA respects my property, we renegotiate. If they don't, I close the lot. And no one parks here again. The message landed. Hard. People murmured, whispered, but many nodded. They understood now that the choice wasn't mine, it was theirs. If they continued letting Karen lead them, they'd lose the very access they were fighting to protect. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to shake my hand, apologize, or ask more questions. Some even offered to join me in writing a petition to make sure the new board members honored my lease terms and removed Karen permanently from HOA involvement. That evening, I sat on the porch again, looking at the lake. It was calm, but my thoughts weren't. This wasn't over. Karen wasn't done. But the tide was turning. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was alone in this fight. A few weeks after the lake meeting, things around Lakeview Heights began to shift. I could feel it in how the neighbors talked to me. The sideways glances had mostly stopped, and people who once avoided me now waved or nodded. A couple even stopped by the cabin to thank me for explaining everything and for keeping access to the lake open. It wasn't some grand victory, but it was enough to let me sleep a little easier. At least now they knew I wasn't the enemy. I was just the guy trying to live in peace on the land my family had always cared for. But Karen, she wasn't done. She disappeared from sight for a while. No more flyers, no more door-to-door lies, and she was quiet on social media too. I thought maybe she had finally accepted the reality of things. Maybe she'd crawled off to lick her wounds or found a new HOA to ruin. But that hope didn't last long. One Thursday morning, I woke up to the sound of tires crunching on gravel, not the slow, casual kind either. These were heavy vehicles. I pulled on my boots and stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, squinting toward the parking lot. And there they were, bulldozers, not just one, 3 bulldozers and 2 work trucks. Guys in neon vests were already walking the edges of the lot, marking the ground with orange spray paint. One of them was on his phone, pacing like he was in charge. I walked straight down. I called, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man with the phone looked up. "You the property owner?" "Yes, this land is mine." "What are you doing on it with bulldozers?" He held up a clipboard but didn't offer it to me. "We've been contracted by the Lakeview Heights HOA. They've approved the construction of a concrete lot, curbs, and drainage system. Said it's urgent." "You've got the wrong property," I said. "They don't own this land." "I do, and they don't have permission for any construction here." He frowned. "Look, I just go where the job tells me. If you've got an issue, take it up with whoever signed this work order." "I'll do more than that," I said. "You have exactly 10 minutes to get those machines off my land before I call the county sheriff." That got his attention. He looked at the other crew members and gave a quick hand signal. One by one, they powered down the engines. I stood, their arms crossed, as the rumble faded into silence. The guy mumbled something about miscommunication before they loaded back into their trucks and rolled out. I didn't waste time. I called the sheriff's office, explained the situation, and they sent out a deputy that same afternoon. His name was Deputy Willis Young, polite, but with a firmness to his voice. "This HOAS crossed the line," he said after I showed him the lease agreement again. "You've got all your paperwork in order. If they bring equipment back, here, call us right away. If they touch so much as a rock, we'll file trespassing charges." He even wrote up an incident report on the spot, took pictures of the tire tracks, and gave me a copy. That night, I emailed everything to my lawyer again. He responded quickly. "This is no longer civil, this is criminal. They knowingly sent a crew onto private property to perform unauthorized construction. That's felony-level trespassing, possibly property damage depending on what they did to the ground." "Time to escalate," I agreed. The next morning I drove down to the county courthouse and filed a formal complaint against the HOA. I named Karen directly. I also contacted the local newspaper editor, someone I knew from back when my grandfather used to sponsor kids' fishing contests on the lake. Once he saw the photos and documents, he agreed it was a story worth printing. The headline that weekend read, "Lakeview HOA sends bulldozers to land they don't own, local resident fights back." The article went viral in the community, not just in Lakeview Heights but in nearby neighborhoods too. Everyone was talking about it at diners, post offices, and even at the gas station down the road. I heard my name come up more in 3 days than I had in 3 years, and then the emails started pouring in. Some were from residents I didn't even know apologizing, thanking me, asking if there was anything they could do. A few were former HOA board members who had left quietly, tired of Karen's antics. One man named Russell emailed me a Goldman an internal HOA memo Karen had written, pushing for full ownership control of the lakefront and surrounding structures, and instructing the board to proceed with visible improvements to establish implied authority. She had literally documented her plan to claim the land through deception. That was the last straw. I printed everything: Russell's email, the internal memo, the bulldozer work order, the lease, the sheriff's report, and the newspaper article, and compiled it into a thick binder. Then I requested a special appearance at the next county planning commission meeting. That meeting was held in a long, dull room with plastic chairs and microphones that didn't quite work, but I came prepared. I stood at the podium and calmly told my story from start to finish. I showed them the bulldozer incident. I read quotes from the HOA memo. I explained how this wasn't just about MIT, it was about abuse of power, about a community being misled, and about someone trying to claim property they had no right to. The commissioners were stunned. A few of them had actually fished in my lake as kids. One even remembered my grandfather's generosity. By the end of the meeting, they passed a unanimous motion. Any future development requests submitted by the Lakeview Heights HOA involving lakefront property or adjacent lots must be verified for ownership and approved by the county assessor's office with full land title review. In other words, they weren't getting away with anything anymore. Karen, meanwhile, had vanished again. Her name was no longer listed on any HOA committee, and her usual loud online presence had gone dark. Rumor had it she'd lawyered up after the county started reviewing whether her actions could lead to criminal charges. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't done either. A few weeks later, I held a second public lake meeting. This time, I brought out a speaker system, had a shaded canopy set up, and even handed out copies of the lease to anyone who wanted to read it. I explained everything that had happened, what the county had decided, and how I planned to renew the parking lot lease with clear boundaries, fees, and protections for both sides as long as they respected my property. When I asked for a show of hands on whether to renew the lease under new fair terms, almost every hand went up, including Joel's, who was now serving as the interim HOA president. "I don't think anyone here wants another Karen situation," he said into the mic. "You've been more patient than anyone else would have been. We're lucky you didn't just lock the gate the moment this started." I still could. I reminded them, not as a threat but as a truth, but I won't, as long as the HOA stays in its lane. They clapped, not out of celebration but out of relief. The drama was finally coming to an end. That night, I sat on my porch again, same place I always did. The lake was calm, the parking lot quiet. A couple of families were down by the shore, fishing, skipping stones, and laughing. And for once, I could enjoy the view without feeling like I had to defend it. Karen had tried to take my home, my peace, and my land. But what she didn't understand, what she never understood, was that you don't bully the man who owns the lake. The following weeks after the HOA meeting were eerily quiet. It was as if the entire neighborhood had hit the mute button. No more drones flying over my cabin. No more HOA members snooping around my property with clipboards and phony inspection badges. For the first time in months, I could sit on my dock, feel the breeze roll off the lake, and sip my morning coffee in peace. But I knew it wasn't over yet, not fully. People like Karen didn't back down permanently, they regrouped. That silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy, and I needed to be ready. I had spent enough time reacting. Now it was time to make the final move. I called my attorney and gave him the green light to begin formal steps for revising the parking lot lease. I wasn't going to be petty, but I was going to be fair and firm. The current lease terms were laughable, practically a favor my grandfather had done for the previous generation of residents. But those days were over. These people had tried to drive me out of my own land. They needed to understand where the real power lived. My lawyer sent a letter to the HOA board with a revised lease. The terms were clear: triple the annual payment, immediate back pay for 6 months of usage under expired terms, and strict no-contact clauses preventing any future interference with my land or structures. If they didn't agree, I would revoke access entirely and install a gate at the lot entrance, and I meant it. With no public street access and nowhere to legally park, the HOA neighborhood would be in complete chaos. The board had 7 days to respond. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled up to my cabin. It wasn't a cop car to clean. A man in a pressed suit and sunglasses stepped out. He introduced himself as a lawyer representing the HOA. He didn't threaten, he begged. "We'd like to negotiate," he said, almost whispering, as if embarrassed by the very idea. "Miss Karen is no longer involved. The new board is more reasonable." I let him talk. Then I told him that negotiations were over the moment they nailed that eviction notice to my cabin door. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. He nodded, swallowed his pride, and left by the end of the week. The board signed the new lease, no edits, no counteroffer. It was done. What followed was almost comical. With Karen gone, the HOA scrambled to put together some form of damage control. Flyers were posted in the neighborhood with smiling new board members pledging a new era of peace and respecting all property owners equally. I didn't believe a word of it, but I stayed out of it. That was their mess too. Clean up. I just maintained the lot, cashed their checks, and lived my life. My only concern was making sure the lease terms were enforced, especially the one that kept HOA members a full 100 yards from my private land. One afternoon, while I was chopping wood by the shed, a young couple from the HOA neighborhood approached me nervously. I put the axe down and raised a brow. "We just wanted to say thank you," the man said. "We didn't know what the HOA was doing until that meeting. You stood up to them, and, well, not many people do that." I nodded and offered a polite smile. They weren't part of the problem. Most of the residents weren't. They were just folks trying to live their lives while a handful of power-hungry control freaks ran wild. Maybe now that would change. Word spread fast. Residents started sending me thank you notes. A few even dropped off fresh baked goods. It was weird at first, like being the folk hero of a neighborhood I didn't belong to, but I didn't mind. It meant they saw what really happened, that Karen and her board had overreached, that they'd tried to take something that was never theirs, and that in the end, truth and property rights stood taller than intimidation and fake authority. Finally had the peace I'd been fighting for. My cabin was safe, my lake was respected, and my land was untouchable. But more than that, I had proven a point. I wasn't some recluse hiding in the woods. I was the owner of the very foundation their community relied on. And if they ever forgot that again, well, I had all the legal papers and all the leverage to remind them. That fall, I hosted a small cookout by the lake. Just a few friends, a grill, and the crackle of firewood. I didn't invite anyone from the HOA, but a few curious neighbors wandered, close enough to wave from across the parking lot. I waved back. That was enough. I didn't need friendships, just respect. That night, as I looked out over the still water, I realized something important. This whole war hadn't just been about my cabin. It had been about drawing a clear, bold line between what's yours and what isn't, and making sure the world knows the difference. The stars came out. The fire faded to glowing embers. and for the first time in a long time, I slept without a single worry. Because this fight was over, and I had won. Enjoy stories where justice always wins. Like, comment, and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Bright Reality for more jaw-dropping true stories every week.